So Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson have been going at it over a few issues, but primarily over the issue of foreign policy. And it's been interesting to watch from a distance because I don't like Tucker Carlson. Everyone knows that. But I don't particularly like Ben Shapiro either. But I know what Ben Shapiro has historically believed, and I know what his beliefs about foreign policy have been. So seeing the kind of bending around backwards to try to please Tucker Carlson and the MAGA base and the people around them has honestly taken me aback a little bit, because I don't know, man. It really feels like Ben Shapiro is shifting what he would regularly say about a war like this in order to please a base that has left him. Let's first listen to what Tucker Carlson had to say about Ben Shapiro, saying that he despises him because he's worried about his kids getting drafted.
You know, I've got 4 draft age children. So if you're playing recklessly, fast and loose with their lives, then I have a right to despise you, and I do. So if you're Nikki Haley, who's running for president, or Ben Shapiro, or half the people I see on television casually mentioning the possibility of nuclear war or sending Americans to fight in the Middle East, or in any way involving us in a war that has nothing to do with prosperity and peace at home, nothing, in other words, to do with us, Americans, then I have a right to call you out and be really offended, because it's my family. They live here. It's not a joke to me. There's nothing abstract about it.
The problem I have with people like Tucker Carlson specifically is that in his mind, there's 2 options, right? It's either we're either going all in, we're all at war, we're all gonna die, or we're like, all of our assets are brought home, we only concentrate what's inside the United States, the rest of the world, it might as well just be outer space. There's the 2 outcomes. But if this was the way that we approached foreign policy, not only would America not be a particularly prosperous country, not only would we have probably also have lost the Cold War, but we also would probably not be able to have any of the allies we have today. The mandatory, I think, balance of deterrence is the idea, is the threat, if we want to keep this in Europe, that the United States would involve itself if a large-scale war in Europe was to happen and any of the other NATO nations were attacked, just like the NATO nations came to our aid after 9/11, that we would also come to their aid. Now, some people might say that this is not in the benefit of the United States, and then, of course, I'd point back to 9/11 and the only time Article 5 being triggered after we were attacked and these countries came to our defense. But putting that aside, in Europe, and I can't, at every stream, it feels like I'm saying the same things over and over and over. In Europe, they're a main export market. In Europe and in the United States, they make up 45% of the world's GDP. That's a significant amount of the world's economy. They took a major hit. If there was major instability, that would affect the United States. That would affect the people working in the manufacturing plants in the United States. And if the economy in Europe went downwards too much, we would start losing American jobs. There'd be American fathers and American mothers going home, unable to put food on the table, and then they would be in food stamp lines. They would be in bread lines, and they'd be getting food stamps, and they would have to go onto social services in order to make ends meet, putting more strain upon the state. So I do think what happens outside of the United States is of concern to us. And by us allowing there to be either a tripwire in Europe for American involvement, or maybe not even a tripwire, landmines in Europe for American involvement, where they don't know for sure or not that attacking a country would bring on involvement, it has been able to inspire a level of stability in Europe post-World War II that a lot of people probably didn't expect, considering how horrific that war was, and a level of stability generally after the Cold War that many people were not sure of. It's part of the reason why everybody rushed to NATO, was because people were not sure of stability post-Cold War. People didn't know what was coming post-Cold War, and the Yugoslav Civil War only further heightened that. My general point is here that American prosperity is directly tied to the conditions of the rest of the world, and trying to separate the two is a fool's errand. Let's see what what Ben said in response. That doesn't mean we always get involved in every war, but I am saying that these things do have a direct impact on American prosperity. He just has decided to ignore those impacts. Oh no, there was a response that he had. Oh, I already closed out the tab. Of course I did. Oh my gosh, did I actually lose the tab? Rip, I think I did. Nope, here it is. Here was Ben Shapiro's response. Tucker is simply lying about my position. I've been calling for a negotiated end to the Ukraine war, freezing the lines of conflict since early on. I have never called for American boots on the ground in Ukraine, ever. I have never called for American boots to defend Israel. I've invited Tucker to sit down multiple times over the past few weeks to clear the air and discuss our differences. He said he's willing, but his team has told us that he's busy for months because of all of his foreign travel. That offer remains open. He's bending back so much to please this schmuck. He's bending backwards so much. And I saw it also during his conversation with Destiny, seeing Ben Shapiro bend backwards and forwards and leftwards and rightwards in order to find a way where it's actually within America's best interests to end our support for Ukraine as soon as possible. And not to mention, giving no word whatsoever to the idea that particularly the Russians haven't been trustworthy when it comes to their ceasefires, when it comes to their 20 rounds of negotiation that led to 20 failed negotiated ceasefires. And so, like, this is good virtue signaling for the Republican base, which has left Ben Shapiro, but none of this is an answer to how do we keep the Russians to their word? How do we stop them from invading again? Because if the problem is, hey, I have kids, I don't want them to get drafted. I don't know the age of Tucker's kids, if they're 11, 12, 13, but if the war happens 6, 7, 8 years from now because we kick down the road, that's going to be the age where your kids are picking up rifles and being sent over there to die. It's not going to be now, it's going to be then. So how do we stop them from pressing against NATO states, which could then bring your kids in direct conflict with them? Well, maybe it would be making it so that the Russians understand that if they were to ever try to attempt something like this again, it would end in absolute disaster. Hundreds of thousands of dead Russians, tons and tons of destroyed equipment, a destroyed economy. And they'd all be poorer, they'd all have less Russians, they'd all have a worse economy, and they'd be in a worse position than they entered the war. If that is the end result, then from a statecraft position, whoever takes Putin's place at the end of the day, whether he croaks or otherwise, they're going to have to consider that. They're going to have to think that before they touch not only a NATO state, let alone a NATO state, but non-NATO states like Moldova. Like, this is how Ben Shapiro historically has viewed these wars. Historically has talked about, like, yes, you need to punish them, you need to establish deterrence, you need to have strong deterrence, you need to believe. But now that it's not as popular to believe these things or to have, use IR terms and seem fancy, now it's negotiate as soon as possible, end the war, freeze the lines. Now, look, at the end of the day, the war might end with negotiation. There's a good chance it'll end with negotiation. But I want from Ben Shapiro and people like him not to immediately, when asked, oh, are you some horrible warmonger because you want to support the Ukrainians? Make the case for why supporting Ukraine is important. Don't just put out there that at the first possible opportunity, you want to end support for Ukraine too. Like, if I could end the war tomorrow and negotiate a way for the Russians to get out of Ukraine, I would love to do that. Everybody in Ukraine would love to do that. This war is horrific. It's awful. I don't like getting shot at, okay? I'd like to get shot at a little bit less. That'd be fantastic. But instead of using the moment to make the case for Ukraine aid, just like he could have when he was on a podcast with Destiny, somebody who's in favor of Ukraine, he always makes sure to just bring up the fact, well, we need to negotiate as soon as possible. And, it's not an endless tech. It's not an endless check. And instead of sitting down and talking about nuclear non-proliferation or defining why it's important for either our consumer base, why it's important for stability in Europe, why it's important for deterrence, why it's important for American credibility, why it's important for the future of Ukraine and making sure that it's a stable state, because a rump state with a poor economy and terrible demographics is just instability waiting to happen. And we don't want to create that at the end of the day. Like, instead of making those cases, it's much easier just give him the narrative, give him the platform, give him the initiative, cede that to him, and just be like, I'm not like the other guys. I don't really support Ukraine like everyone else. To me, it's pathetic. This was 4 years ago. We'd be talking to a totally different person. This is before the Trump movement. We'd be talking to a totally different person than Ben Shapiro. But like when we go over to Israel and Hamas, we need to fucking annihilate Hamas off the face of the earth. We need to annihilate it, destroy it, smash it, kill, 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 kill. But then we get over to, well, you know, freeze the... it just feels so... Ugh. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Am I making myself clear? I hope I'm making myself clear. I just wish that I saw a level of fervor from Ben Shapiro for his positions or why this might be important. Because, you know, in those circles, there's not a lot of pro-Ukraine voices anymore, even though they were supposed to be the people that were supposedly the serious national security guys. But the Republican Party is quickly, very quickly, not becoming the party of not serious national security, even though I don't think they were really ever the party of serious national security. They are even just chopping all signals of even attempting to have that image. And it seems that with just a large portion of the Republican Party is just like dropping it at a drop of a hat. Ben Shapiro went further to try to respond to this while answering questions by Dave Rubin.
I want to ask you one other thing related to this, since I brought up Tucker a couple of times. He's been somewhat critical of you. I actually think kind of unfairly, and I defended you on my show a couple of weeks ago, basically saying that you were too overly emotive about Israel and what was going on there. And I think there's some subtle overtones that come with that. What do you make of his criticism of you related to this? Also, and I know it's not the most fun thing to talk about because we all live in the same world in a sense. Also, the fact that, you know, he's trying to build a network. You have a network. He might view you as competition now. There could be some other motives going on here.
I mean, listen, best to Tucker in all of his endeavors with regard to his network. I think that he put out a little documentary on the border recently that I thought was quite good. Again, I like many things that Tucker says. What Tucker said about me is that I don't love the country, which I found absolutely peculiar. It's something that I would never say about him. He and I disagree about a wide variety of issues, ranging from economics to foreign policy. That's a bizarre...
I'll say it. I think he likes money and his image much more than his country. I'll say that. If he did, he wouldn't lie so openly, and then he wouldn't back up on those lies and never correct them and just keep trudging along. If he did, he wouldn't go to the Moscow metro, ooh and ah, and pretend that it's the most beautiful thing in the world, and we couldn't do something like that in the United States, or we don't have things like that in the United States. He wouldn't go to the Moscow grocery store, spend like $100 on groceries, act in amazement that he got more groceries there for $100 than he did in the United States, and say, oh my God, this seems like your ideology isn't that important. Yes, freedom, democracy, all these, I guess that's all just gay. And then what do we find out afterwards? He doesn't include any information about what the standard of living is in Russia. He doesn't include any information about what the average pay is in Russia. He doesn't include any information about what the average Russian spends of their paycheck on food in Russia. And he doesn't include the fact that, yeah, food costs less in Russia. You also make tremendously less in Russia. And the value of $1 in Russia has continued to go down as it is inflated away. And food prices, like the prices of egg, has gone up. Egg prices have gone up 61% in a year. 61%. Some stores were limiting the amount of eggs you could take. 1 egg per person, 2 eggs per person, 3 eggs, and you're rolling in it. Yeah, I'll say that, to me, seems pretty unpatriotic. Like just going out of your way to try to make your country look bad in comparison to a country that's doing worse.
Bizarre notion. And again, I've actually invited Tucker to come on my show. Like, we've been...
What I really didn't like is how he said it seems like ideology doesn't matter that much. As if, like, principles about freedom, civil liberties, and all of this did not matter when governing a state, because at the end of the day, the food prices in Russia are still low. Again, he didn't add the context that makes it look like actually that's quite expensive. And, you know, again, Russians make less than Americans, so it wasn't a fair comparison, and he didn't give people the proper context. But yeah, he was trying to pretend as if ideology did not matter. And if you're trying to say as an American that ideology when governing state does not matter, then, I mean, you don't sound like a freedom-loving American to me.
Texting. I think it's good for the right to have these discussions. I'd be perfectly willing to discuss with him. Hopefully we can work out a time to make that happen. Because, yeah, I mean, I too would be interested in some clarification of whether, you know, in fact, he does think that I don't love the country in the way that he suggested. Because, again, I think that I doubt he feels that way. I really doubt he feels that way. Perhaps it was poorly articulated, but I'd like to certainly ask him the question.
All right, so Tucker has said it a couple times.
Dude, I'm sorry, man, but to me, this is like horribly pathetic. To me, this is horribly, horribly pathetic. Like, he's told that he doesn't love the country. His response is, I know he loves the country. And then bending backwards. That's how I saw it, man. Where is the backbone from these people who are supposed to be the hawks of the Republican Party? My God, maybe they were chickens the whole time. Chicken hawks. Oh, here's another example of at least Ben showing some backbone, so it shows that he can do it, right? Here's N wokeness trying to compare Donald Trump being arrested for the crimes we know he committed. Like, for example, trying to he increased the penalties for the Presidential Records Act and then violated the Presidential Records Act. Like, it was not even crimes that would blindside him, crimes that Donald Trump knew he was committing as he was committing the crimes, and is why he was erasing, like, and turning off his video cameras in Mar-a-Lago as he moved the documents around to hide them. You cannot compare this to Alexei Navalny, but they still attempt to. Check this out. End wokeness. One of the popular conservative meme accounts on Twitter wrote, Donald J. Trump arrested 4 times. Trump's lawyers arrested. Steve Bannon arrested. Peter Navarro arrested. Rudy Giuliani arrested. Roger Stone arrested. Mike Flynn arrested. Mike Flynn, by the way, was the guy who called for a Myanmar-style coup in the United States. Just throwing it out there. Unfortunately, America has lost its moral standing to condemn foreign regimes. Okay, number one, none of these people are dead. All of these schmucks, whether they deserve it or not on an individual level, on an institutional level, they do. They are going to get a free, fair trial. They're going to be able to have a judge. They're going to be able to have a jury. They're going to be able to go through the whole shebang. Alexei Navalny got put in a Siberian prison and died after being poisoned. I think that's a little different than Donald J. Trump. But if we went by Donald J. Trump's legal doctrine, and his legal doctrine states that the president of the United States cannot be held legally liable for crimes, you need to have the ability to have as Trump put it, a rogue cop, then even if Joe Biden did all this, that's just within the legal bounds, baby. In fact, the fact that Joe Biden hasn't murked Donald Trump should be seen as a blessing if we're using the standard of, if he's the president of the United States, he can't be legally held liable for crimes. Just throwing that out there. Anyway, Ben Shapiro did react to this saying, no, we haven't. The militarization of the American justice system is terrible. And there it is. There's the twisting and the turning and the bending. Also, every one of those people is alive. True, not in jail. And will get a full trial with appeals process. Navalny was poisoned, then falsely sentenced to 30 years in the gulag, and then likely murdered. You don't have to support the weaponization of the justice system in America to say that America is far superior to the dictatorial hellscape that is Putin's government. And then in the responses, you've got like conspiracy nuts like Servich and all these other fucking morons like going after him. Thing is here, again, for me, it's the bending and the turning and the militarization of the American justice system. You can maybe talk about the politicization, but the militarization, like, come on, reel it in. You know Trump committed crimes. Ben Shapiro in his debate with Destiny admitted that he grades Trump on a curve due to the crazy shit he says. So Ben Shapiro has admitted to treating Trump differently from other politicians because he's so sporadic, because he acts so crazily. And that behavior doesn't just affect the words he says, but also the actions he takes. When he called the Georgian Secretary of State, tried to intimidate him to get the votes necessary for him to win, that was illegal. When he hid those documents after telling the National Archives they didn't have them anymore, that was illegal. It was a violation of the Presidential Records Act, the thing that he increased the penalty for. When they were trying to get that false slate of electors, that was illegal. When they were trying to make the vice president of the United States do something that he didn't have the authority to do. Or what about when he called for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution? Would Ben Shapiro give so much leeway to Joe Biden if he called for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution to keep him in power? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he's just trying to stay in the, what's it called? The window? It's called not the purview window, but the window, the political window, the the Overton window. He's trying to stay in the Overton window for his movement. And that's what I think he's trying to do. And this is the result of that.